Welcome to a special edition of Jesus Calling, Stories of Faith. Cyntoia Brown Long shares the redemptive story of how she found hope through faith after an unimaginable series of events marked her adolescence. While still a high schooler, the man Cyntoia thought was her boyfriend began physically and sexually abusing her and forced her into prostitution. One fateful night in 2004, while being trafficked, 16-year-old Cyntoia was in a life-threatening situation with a man that ended up in a fatal shooting. Cyntoia was arrested and later convicted on a charge of first-degree murder. She shares with us about the downward spiral her life had been taking and how, after her conviction, she purposed to create hope even through this harrowing situation.
My name is Cyntoia Brown Long. I am 31 years old, and for about 2 months now, I've been free from prison. I was incarcerated at the age of 16, and after 15 years, God finally freed me. So I grew up in Clarksville, Tennessee, about 3 minutes from the military base, Fort Campbell, and my dreams pretty much changed all the time. So one minute I may have wanted to be an architect or an engineer. Not really sure I knew exactly what that consisted of, but it just sounded fancy enough for me to be. So growing up in my house, my mom, we grew up in a Baptist church, missionary Baptist, and every Sunday, every Wednesday, she made sure that we went to church. And so it was a constant, and there was a lot of structure in my house. My mother's very strict. So for all intents and purposes, I had a very healthy environment at home, but it was at school that I would start to get in trouble, started hanging around the wrong people, eventually ended up going to alternative school, got into some more trouble, and led to me being locked up in the juvenile delinquent system. Once I became a delinquent, I actually ran away from the facility and ended up being on the streets in Nashville with people that I had met from the facility. Started doing drugs, smoking marijuana, doing cocaine on a regular basis. I did cocaine for about 2 weeks, and that was with the man that I had actually met, who is now known as my trafficker. At the time, I thought he was my boyfriend. That's kind of how it happens. When you're young, you're on the run, you don't really understand everything that you're putting yourself into because you're putting yourself in a lot of adult situations without knowing what you're getting yourself into. And before I knew it, I was actually being trafficked on the streets of Nashville. So the night that led to my incarceration, I was actually staying in a hotel room with a Cutthroat. He was the man who, at the time, I thought was my boyfriend. And it was time for me to go back out and bring money back for us to get another hotel room. And I just felt really fearful, really uncomfortable, and again, was in a situation that a 16-year-old girl should not have been with a 43-year-old man. And I ended up shooting him because I was fearful of what was going to happen. So after that happened, I went back to the hotel, and probably within 24 hours, I was caught by the police and I was arrested for murder. So when I was first sentenced, I was actually told that I would spend the rest of my life in prison. In the state of Tennessee, you have to serve at least 51 calendar years before you're even considered for any type of release. So I saw a lot of people around me who were given the same news, and they kind of just gave up hope after a while. And I didn't want to be that. I don't want to be that person. I knew that there was still some way that I could live some type of meaningful life. I still had a family who was there for me, and I wanted to keep going for their sake, not just for my sake. I don't think at the time that I made that decision, I really cared enough about myself to make it for myself. But it was really for my mother's sake that I wanted to do better, and then I wanted to actually live a meaningful life. And so the opportunity to join a college course through a local university, Lipscomb University, came, and I worked really hard, went through all kinds of hurdles, and I finally got accepted into the program. And so it was after I started taking classes there that I started to see, like, wow, like this is really possible for me to actually live a real life in prison through the life program. And I spent most of my time studying my schoolwork or having conversations with other people. And it really just like opened my mind up. And so that was really helpful for me, and developing self-control and learning how to make the right decisions there in the prison environment, because it's very difficult to, try to keep yourself out of trouble there.
With her sharp mind and determination to expand her horizons, Cyntoia earned an associate's degree and then a bachelor's degree. She even worked with a documentary crew to release a documentary of her life on PBS in 2011 called Me Facing Life, sharing her story with millions around the world. But in 2017, there was one man who resonated very strongly with this young woman's story, and he would eventually become her husband.
My name is Jamie Long. I'm from a city outside of Houston by the name of Lamar, Texas. God-fearing man. I'm a husband. And that's who I am. The way me and my wife met is nothing short of a miracle. I come from a musical background in my family. My uncle being Huey Long, my grandfather, Curtis Long, he played guitar for Bobby Blue Bland and a whole bunch of your famous blues singers. Everyone in my family sings, everyone in my family plays an instrument, and I just kind of fell into that, that bloodline. I grew up in a Christian family, and my mother always instilled in me Christ. I remember hearing the voice of the Lord at a young age, and that didn't change when I became an adult. I started to really realize where this voice was coming from, who it was coming from. I was actually in my studio preparing to go back on tour, finishing up an album, and I was having writer's block. And I just decided to step out of the studio and go into one of the extra rooms we had at the studio, and on my TV there was the YouTube recommendations for me to watch, and my TV had been on for 3 days, and I just didn't turn it off. I noticed it was an hour long, and I was like, there's no way I'm watching this whole story. I'm just like, if you know me personally, it's hard to get me to watch a 10-minute segment.
Yeah.
First of all, I don't even know what this is about, but if it recommended me to watch it, I'll watch it. An hour later, I was just like, wow, that was pretty amazing. And the Lord stopped me in my tracks, and he said, write her a letter, and write it right now. And I said, I'm not gonna write her a letter right now. I'm gonna go back in the studio and finish doing what I'm doing. And it was just so heavy on my heart, I never made it back into that room. I stopped right there what I was doing. I wrote her a letter, and I kind of said, okay, God, I did it. I put it in the envelope, and I said, all right, I'll send it out tomorrow. He said, take it back out the envelope and burn the edges of the paper. And I said, okay, either I'm going crazy or, God is up to something. And I burnt the edges of the paper. I was obedient to the voice of the Lord, and I sent the letter in, and I forgot I sent it. And about a week or two later, I got a letter back from her. She told me that the reason she wrote back was because she saw the edges of the paper burnt. And I said, okay, we deal with a God who's serious about detail. So.
Yeah, that was the only reason I wrote, because it stuck out so much, because I wasn't writing anybody back at the time. I had got so many letters in, but I wasn't responding to anyone.
Yeah,
so.
Nah, I'm not a person to write anybody either.
You sure
so,
ain't.
No.
So when Jamie first wrote me, he would speak a lot to me about God and, the things that God was telling him to let me know, that, to have faith in him, that he was going to get me through this. And at that time, I had become so bitter and so angry because I felt that I had spent so much time praying for God to get me out of this. And here I was, and it's like, well, where are you? And I didn't recognize that I was angry. I had just told myself, well, I just don't believe, like, he's just not real. And, Jamie would constantly, not in a pushy way, but he would just continue to tell me about like his experience, like things that God had did in his life. And it was like, well, I remember a similar circumstance. And so, yeah, I guess there's no explanation, but that was God. And so it really caused me to start going back and looking over things with new eyes and like, all right, maybe I just kind of explained this away because I was angry. If I had to say what I love most about Jamie is I love the way he loves God so much. And so like that's helpful. And like, it's just good to have somebody who is my best friend, but who also can help me to stay on the right track, keeps me accountable. And that was the biggest step in me recognizing that I was angry at God. And once that happened, like I just started to listen, and like I was just soaking up everything. I wanted him to constantly, minister to me. I wanted to read the Bible with him constantly. We started reading Jesus Calling every day together, and we would talk about, okay, well, what did you take from that? We talk about experiences that it spoke to us, and I just started getting hungry for it.
Well, me personally, I find Jesus Calling so special. Is sometimes we think that God and Christ is this imaginary person in the sky, and we call on him when we need something, like a genie in a bottle. But that's not true. Like, Jesus is always calling. To me, it's my coffee for the morning. Like, it's something that I can get my day started with. Yeah. So that's what it is to me.
Yeah, I agree. And I love how, you have the verses that she includes for every day, but then exactly. You have the passage that just really makes it like hit home.
Exactly.
So it really speaks to you on a personal level. And a lot of times it's like,
wow.
Like,
yeah, like, oh,
I
wow,
needed to hear that. Like,
yeah,
how do they know that today that is what I needed to hear? And so that's what I love about it.
Right.
I am the truth, the one who came to set you free. As the Holy Spirit controls your mind and actions more fully, you become free in me. You are increasingly released to become the one I created you to be. This is a work that I do in you as you yield to my spirit. I can do my best handiwork when you sit in the stillness of my presence, focusing your entire being on me. Let my thoughts burst freely upon your consciousness, stimulating abundant life. I am the way and the truth and the life. As you follow me, I lead you along paths of newness, ways you have never imagined. Don't worry about what is on the road up ahead. I want you to find your security in knowing me, the one who died to set you free.
Amen.
This passage says to me, it speaks to the fact that, again, Jesus is the one that can set you free. At the end of the day, we can talk about the courtrooms, we could talk about lawyers, we can talk about judges, we can talk about everything here on the earth, but like to experience true freedom, that's whether in prison or out of prison, it comes through him. And I think that's important to remember to everyone who's in prison, everyone who's out of prison. I know just about every prisoner has this book on their shelves, and I can remember, I know this isn't the only passage that speaks along those lines, but I can remember just how much it meant to me, like being in prison and reading something like that. And that's pretty much when things just really started changing, like in my situation, because things had been stagnant when we first met. I had lost my last appeal, and so my hope levels were like, and
like nobody was saying her name around the time we met. It
no.
was just like
No, there was like a little blip of time when the documentary had first aired in like 2011, where people were, advocating and things, and then it kind of just died. It just went away. And so it was like, man, that's not going for me. I don't have any support, like in terms of people trying to advocate for me. My last appeal has been denied, like whatever. And here was this man telling me, no, you're going to get out. God says you're going to get out. And you have to decide if you're going to believe what man is telling you or if you're going to believe God. And it was when I made that decision and I said, you know what, I'm going to believe what God says. All of a sudden, miraculously, my appeal was opened back up, which never happens. And just things started happening.
But when I wrote the letter, I know it's one other specific thing that the Lord told me to do. He told me to put the hashtag Free Cyntoia, and he told me to put the date 2017. And eventually that will become the hashtag that actually went viral.
And it's so crazy because we didn't even realize that I kept all my letters like that he ever wrote me. So I had the letter, and people would always write letters and put hashtag this, hashtag that, hashtag for you, and hashtag, And so I just thought it was just something that people would just put on their letters. I didn't really think much of it.
As we go back and look at that letter, it's just like God was so intentional with what he was doing.
Yeah. And then probably like 5-6 months later, the hashtag started out of nowhere. Like just like literally overnight, it was like, whoa, like what is this? And
I didn't put it online, so just to see it come from a letter and, God showing that he knew what he was doing the whole time, and we can't pinpoint who started it today. It's like, okay, well, let's give God his credit, and I give the glory to him because he started it. You can't explain it.
Yeah.
And so I don't want the credit for it, and I don't want no one else to take the credit for it. Thank you, Father. You're amazing.
Cyntoia's story continued to elicit compassion from people around the world, and supporters rallied around her with the hashtag #FreeCyntoia. In January 2019, Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam granted clemency to Cyntoia, and she walked out of prison a free woman in August of 2019. Cyntoia reflects on the day she received the news of her clemency and goes on to share about her new book, Free Cyntoia, and how she's spending her days in freedom.
I kind of already knew in my spirit that it was coming. I don't want to act like I'm too surprised because God doesn't surprise me. He always does what he says he's going to do, but this is really awesome. So when I issued the clemency statement, I was like, he's going to get his glory. Yes, there were many people that came together that he put it on their hearts to stand up and to come together. But the point is, it was him. And it was because he is a God of second chances. And so I felt like that was really important to stress, and the first thing that I actually had to say after, because I knew that people would be paying attention to that. And I felt like it was the perfect time to just let them know that this, what you're witnessing right now, this miracle, it's from nobody but him. So my book, Free Cyntoia, My Search for Redemption in the American Prison System, covers everything. And I mean absolutely everything that I experienced over the 15 years. I wanted to make sure that I included things about, the juvenile system, the school system, even before I became involved as a juvenile, different things that led up to that, because I wanted to paint a more clear picture of how this happened. I wanted to include how I ended up trafficking. If you look at it, you think, wow, like you met this person in the space of 2 weeks and he had you do this. And I think that's also important. In order for us to accurately combat trafficking, we have to understand what makes girls vulnerable to it. We have to understand like how you get from point A to point B. You're not just kidnapped and put on the streets. It doesn't just happen like that. It's not always that clear cut. A lot of times, it's more subtle. It's more manipulative. It's more preying on the minds of people who are vulnerable in terms of being susceptible to manipulation, to lies, to thinking things are one way and they're not another. So I kind of wanted to dive into that, into everything that happened. And then of course, everything with the justice system, with being tried, with spending time in prison, actually taking the steps to rehabilitate yourself, because unfortunately, our prisons are not places of rehabilitation. They're not places of redemption. And so I wanted to show what it's like for someone who actually applies himself, someone who fights to find that rehabilitation in a place that's not at all conducive to it. My husband and I, we've been working with our attorney on developing our nonprofit organization, the Foundation for Justice, Freedom, and Mercy, or the JFAM Foundation, as we call it. And we'd really like to work to try to get more stories out there from the people who've experienced the justice system themselves, because we think their voice is important, and really understanding what's going on in the system, and really understanding what we can do, where we can kind of fit in to change, and then also just helping people to understand that there is a need for change, because I think that's the big area that's lacking right now. A lot of people don't think that the system is broken. They don't think there's flaws. And so we'd like to focus our work there. Even though I was in a physical prison, even throughout that time, I was in prison within prison. I was in a prison of anger. I was in a prison of my past, constantly letting that hold me, captive, anxiety. Like, I've spent time in many prisons, and I was constantly trying to find a way out of it, constantly trying to find a solution. Maybe if I exercise more, I won't feel this anxiety. Maybe if, I just keep my mouth shut, I won't be angry and I won't have these outbursts. And nothing ever worked. And it didn't work until I just surrendered. I was like, God, I don't have control over this. I can't fix it, but I know that you can, and I'm just going to let you do what you do with it. I'm just going to trust that, I am a work in progress, and you're working on me, and I'm just asking you to come into this situation and take over, because I just can't anymore. And it wasn't immediate. It's not immediate, but it definitely takes place, and he definitely can fix whatever it is that you're going to do. Yeah, God is no respecter of persons. What he did for me, he can do for you. He is in the prisoner freeing business.
He's willing to do it.
Oh, yeah.
He wants to do it.
Yeah.
He's waiting to do it. So
he did it for Joseph. He did it for Cyntoia. He can do it for you too.
Exactly.
And no matter what your prison is. And so you just got to submit to him and just cast all your cares on him and let him do what he does. That's who he is. He's God.
You can read more about Cyntoia's story in her new book, Free Cyntoia, available at your favorite book retailer today.